to the panel on blockchain-based identity management systems, opportunities and challenges. My name is Schroers and I'm the moderator today. My research interest is on electronic identification, so I'm really happy to be here today. Lately, a lot has been going on in that regard. So self-sovereign identity becomes a lot more prominent. Even the European Digital Identity Regulation proposal, which will amend the eIDAS regulation. Sorry. So even the European Digital Identity Regulation proposal, which will amend the eIDAS regulation, already includes some references to SSI. And SSI can potentially, and actually in many cases it does, employ blockchain or digital ledger technology at the core. And this is why it's a good reason to have today a closer look at this. And that's why I'm very happy to have such an excellent panel here today to discuss the different aspects of blockchain-based identity management systems. To my left is Simaran Jindal. She's an executive partner at IBM Consulting in Europe within the travel and transport sector. As a strategy and business development leader for more than 20 years in the technology industry, she's passionate about applying technology in ways that enhance and make society better by removing friction. She is currently focused on the impact of decentralized internet on business and individuals, keeping trust and security at the center. She joins the panel today, sharing her learnings on why business and individuals should care about decentralized identifiers. Next to her is Paolo Campegiani. Paolo is the Director of Innovation for Namiria, a trusted service provider. He's also the project leader for the ISO technical report on blockchain and digital identity, and for the European Commission is doing the preparatory groundwork for the standardization of the electronic ledger as in the revision of the eIDAS regulation. Next to him is Dr. Alexandra Giannopoulou. She is a lawyer, a researcher with broad expertise in information law and the project manager of the DigiRise project at the Digital Freedom Fund. Her research addresses the regulatory challenges of emerging techno-social systems with a strong digital right focus. She is a research fellow at the Institute of Information Law and an associate researcher at the CNRS Center for Internet and Society in Paris. Finally, our fourth panelist is Bilgesu. She's a doctoral researcher at the Center for IT and IP Law of KU Leuven, and she researches on the legal implications of blockchain technology for biometric identities. She's also the one who brought us all here together by organizing this panel. So each panelist will now first have like 2 to 3 minutes to shortly give an overview of who they are, what they do, and what they consider important with regard to blockchain-based identity management systems. Afterwards, we will have a discussion on some questions, and then we will have a Q&A with the audience. So please feel free to ask your questions. Okay, we will start with Simaran. What do you consider important with regard to blockchain-based technologies?
Good morning, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here. And before I share what I consider important on decentralized identifiers and blockchain, I firstly want to share that I'm, like many of you, a common user who got fascinated about this area purely from a perspective of future. I do not want to pass on the current situation to my children, so I needed to understand what is going to change for me, thereby the next generation. So coming to the importance of digital identity, I'm assuming the audience today has some form of digital identity, right? Whether it's with your bank or whether it's an online account, in whichever countries you're living in. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and for each one of them, I'd request just a show of hands. How many of you sitting today feel that the only thing I want from a digital identity, so I only have one identity? I don't want to remember all these multiple user IDs and passwords. One person. Okay, thank you very much. My second question would be, how many of you think that I want to be paid for my data? That's important. One only. I'm very pleased. Thank you very much. So my final question, how many of you would want to be informed who is asking for your data, why are they asking, what are you sharing, and potentially what are they going to do with it? Really. So I think, at least for my part of the conversation, that sets the premise quite clearly. Nobody's interested in money. Nobody's really worried about too many accounts here. The most important area that we are really worried about our identity online is knowing where my data is going, what is the data being used for, and what am I sharing? Do I have information first, and then to a large degree, some control over it. So I think that's an area which is extremely important for me when it comes to digital identity, online identity, and it's predominantly for people who have access to, online world. Many of you, I'm sure, have also heard a term, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and I'm sure each one of you have your own understanding, your own definition, and generally the world is struggling with that. The main point here is that the way internet has evolved, identity online has also evolved for us, right? And the struggle that we are dealing with European regulations, I think Europe, of course, is leading, but globally is about how do we just ensure that there is one identity that we can verify really quickly, we eliminate documentation, and it's trusted. It's secure, and it tells this is Simran, this is ABC company, and it's verified. So that's another part of the digital identity, which is extremely important. I'd like to put forward is everything that we do around our education, our social behavior, social patterns. How are they trusted? Do we allow organizations to verify them, and to what degree? So with that, I'll pass on to Paolo to share his views.
Thank you. So first question, first point very important. I've given consent to be recorded. I don't know why my picture is blurred on the panel, market private. So if you want to take a picture of me, you are free to do that. I'm not going to shoot you, don't worry. Okay. Said that, I'm sorry for this half of the room because you are a bit covered by these columns of quite artistic value, by the way. So feel free, if you want to ask something to us, move yourself somehow. Because I don't see all of you from this part of the room. Sorry for that. Regarding blockchain digital identity, I'm also going to ask you a couple of very simple things just to tailor my speech in the most suitable way for you. How many of you are familiar with the revision of the IDAS regulation? Have you read that? So you know that the revision of the IDAS regulation is providing a wallet service or not? How many of you? Okay. And how many of you are more familiar with the more general concept of self-sovereign identity? Do you know what self-sovereign identity? Okay, almost more or less the same people. So, okay, you avant-garde. Okay, just to give some element on that. The IDAS regulation is now going under major revision. This revision, among other things, is introducing a concept that is European Digital Identity Wallet. This wallet is a software, okay? It's a software wallet, very similar to some wallets that we already have on our smartphones, and it contains information about us. This information about the single owner, this information will be structured in terms of attributes, okay? So imagine that an attribute could be Paolo has PhD in computer science. This PhD has been awarded in 2012, whatever, by University of Rome, blah, blah, blah. This kind of information. So attributes are information belonging, pertaining to an individual identity. And this information, all attributes, will be managed following this self-sovereign identity approach. This means that these attributes are with us, are managed directly by us. We have this collection of information about us. And when we are going to ask for an online service, we decide to provide some of this information to the online service in order to have the transaction apply. So an example, imagine that I'm going to participate because I want to be hired by a public administration in Italy. In this case, I have to prove that I have a degree. So I go to the website, I say, okay, I want to be considered for this selection. I'm submitting my application. And they tell me, yes, provide information about your degree. I decide which information about my degree I'm going to provide them. As an example, they could be interested in knowing my actual degree, my final score, but maybe they are not interested in knowing all my results in the different exams I had during my university courses, okay? So this is a self-sovereign approach. This approach is the one that will be at the center of this revision of the IDAS regulation and will be delivered by this wallet, this software. So you go, in practical terms, to your university, in ideal world. This university will provide you about information about your degree, You collect this information and you have to share. But it's a process that starts you personally. You start personally. You decide to share this information to the different service providers when they ask you about this kind of information. Okay, this is the idea. This is the general approach. It's clearly privacy friendly because the user is in control of all of their data. Okay, so you decide what you are going to share with whom. This is the idea. And this is the core of the revision of the IDAS regulation. This new revised regulation will enter into force by more or less the end of this year, because now we are in the trialogue discussion, which means that a few months from now we have a final text of the regulation. And by the end of next year, we have all the technical details set in order to be able to discuss. I'm giving you as a context so we are all on the same page. And then moving from this, then we could discuss about the opportunity and the risks about using blockchain systems, which is the other relevant element to discuss when we are considering this kind of approaches. Just an important point to clarify and to specialize this a bit more. This model that we are going to enjoy and to apply in Europe is not totally decentralized, because our digital identity starts with our country of residence. So I'm going to my country residence and they help me certifying that I have a name, a surname, a fiscal code or VAT code or whatever kind of nationality you want. And from this on, I'll be able to collect information about me. So it's not that I'm creating my identity. I'm collecting information about my identity, but my identity starts with my country. This is the idea. So if you're curious, this is called the trust anchor model, okay? Because we start with an anchor, which is my relation with my country of residence, okay? This is just for my introduction, then we enter in the details, okay, later. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Are we putting the slide on? Well,
this one.
I mean, oh. I don't know if it works.
No.
It's fine. It's mostly for your to follow the information that I would like to give more concisely. Anyway, so while this happens, so hi, I'm Alexandra Giannopoulou. I work at the Digital Freedom Fund. I am the manager of the Digitalized project, which, yeah, thanks. Getting to that. So I'm the manager of the Digitalized project, which informs and explores ways to use the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights in digital rights strategic litigation. This is my current employment. The things I'm going to be talking about today relate to this position. So until very recently, I was working as a researcher at the University of Amsterdam at the Institute for Information Law. And specifically, I was a researcher at the Blockchain Society Policy Research Lab, an ERC project, examining legal, social, and technological implications of blockchain-based systems and decentralized technosocial systems. This project is coming to an end at the end of June, essentially, and we have an upcoming conference where Bilgesu also will be there, and I will be there on the 3rd and 4th of July at the University of Amsterdam. If y'all are there, please come to attend. Yeah, it does work. So this is a bunch of research that we published over the years. This is some of it. I have highlighted the two most, let's say, relevant ones for our discussion today, and in case you feel that you would like to read more about what the project and I had to say on the topic of digital identity and self-sovereign identity. This is my current employment. I also teach at the university in Athens, and I work at the Digital Freedom Fund, as I said. So this is a little bit of the introduction of where I stand, where I come from. in terms of digital identity, what I find important. It's a strange question. What I find important in this discussion, I will be a little bit less enthusiastic. I have been a little bit less enthusiastic also in my writing about the topic. We landed on self-sovereign identity discussions from the essentially exploration of blockchain developments, let's say, and I found what I found curious about this specific technological, let's say, enthusiasm was that we found in self-sovereign identity the potential candidate that would make blockchain an actual use case, real-life use case. I found what I find particularly interesting now to follow is the penetration of these ideas in European policymaking with the EIDAS revision and the introduction of all these new players. I'm particularly curious, and specifically because we are at CPDP, I'm particularly curious about how all these new actors and new intermediaries that are introduced through the European regulation will actually settle in terms of data protection responsibilities, because there is a lot of uncertainty around data protection and blockchain-based systems or any sort of decentralized system. But on top of that, adding the fact that we're talking about digital identification, specifically state issued, where we all know that it's a sovereign responsibility of the state to produce these identities to us, and then it's actually that responsibility also translates into a liability for them. And I'm particularly curious to see how this idea about user empowerment, individual empowerment, and user-centric systems will inform the way that we also view these responsibilities. Does user-centric identity mean also user responsibility? And how that how this relationship actually aligns with the empowerment narrative. And I mean, we'll discuss more about this later. So, Bilgesu, thank you. Do you want this or?
I think that works, yeah. Thank you. Oh, I don't think that's the... Okay. Yeah. So, hi, again, my name is Bilgesu. I'm a doctoral researcher at KU Leuven, Center for IT and IP Law, and my PhD project focuses on the data protection issues of blockchain-based biometric identity, which has been gaining popularity in recent years, both in interdisciplinary research and in private sector, for example, civic and URs, and in public sector as well. And on the state level, for example, Bhutan has become the pioneer in combining biometric data and blockchains. And this is also called self-sovereign biometric identity. And even now we see examples on the metaverse where you can mint your identity as a non-fungible token. So, which brings us actually the main problem that I'm tackling in my research. Biometric data, as you know, is highly sensitive, as also acknowledged by the GDPR Article 9. And why actually, first of all, they allow unique identification of individuals. But more to that, they also allow access to the rest of the identity of an individual, because they allow actually these separate points about your life to be connected in one single identity. And they leave permanent traces. We cannot really change our biometric data. We cannot change our fingerprint or face, and they are publicly available. And this creates actually potentially a permanent record in any kind of network, including, of course, biometric-based, blockchain-based systems. And they reveal almost always additional sensitive data. When we talk about biometric data, we almost always talk about additional data that is highly sensitive, that might reveal ethnicity or health status or even genetic data. But some of them might be even more sensitive than the others. For example, in the salt waste case from 2 years ago, the court stated that facial biometrics can be obtained on a mass scale because they are publicly available, so without even the knowledge of the data subject. So these problems are actually pertain to centralized databases, mostly. But depending on how we decentralize biometric data, other problems may also occur. And what I observe is that problems with blockchain-based ID systems might even be exacerbated where biometric data are involved, meaning that combined with such systems. And one of the least problematic systems actually is visualized here. So in this system, biometric data is actually kept in a wallet, in the device itself. And wallet software, you probably are familiar if you're into cryptocurrencies. There's almost always a wallet that might be hosted by you or might be hosted by a third-party provider as well. And two very important components of this self-sovereign identity structure is the decentralized identifiers. And with this specification, actually, biometric data can be used to release the decentralized identifiers to the network and further also authenticate the user to present verifiable credentials, which are meant to be selectively shared. And this was, again, was the introduction to my research. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Then let's go to some questions. The first one I would like to ask you is, how do these blockchain-based identity management systems function? Not to go into detail, but actually, what about it that why should we use them? So maybe Simaran, you already from a more data subject point of view.
So, given that I'm coming from IBM, we of course do use a lot of blockchain. I have a splitted view on blockchain-based or non-blockchain-based identifying systems. I'm assuming the audience has a basic knowledge about how blockchain works in terms of the blocks and the security, and there is a verification system that happens. So essentially, for any digital identity and to give ownership to a user, you need a way to make sure that the user and there's a group of nodes or people are part of that verification system. For me personally, I don't think that we need to have blockchain-based identity systems. That is one of the technologies. There are many other systems that are available to build these decentralized identifiers, which is essentially a document containing the information that's sort of about you, and it's not limited to just your name, date of birth, or address. It's a lot. It could be part of your travel data. It could be your education. It could be your social patterns and many other things that that build an identity holistically. How they work primarily is around making sure they are secure, because fundamentally the technology is tamper-proof, and I'm saying tamper-proof because it can still be tampered, but it's a lot more difficult to do it than our current, the technologies. I personally also have a concern around using blockchain, because if you ever decide to not have an online identity for whatever reason as an individual, it's really difficult. It's almost for me impossible to delete it. So my point of view around is it's depending on who is building the network, who is managing the identity or that identifier. It's a lot also on that organization, how they want to build the underlying technology. And you will see in the future multiple digital identifiers that each individual can have, and they could be built either on a blockchain or a non-blockchain network. Your view, Paolo?
Okay, thanks. Just some context in order to answer to this very complex question, actually. This eIDAS regulation disciplines some trust services. These are they called. A trust service is a service about trust, and trust in digital world means an evaluation of the risks you are taking when you are making some assumption on the world. So an example, my company is a trust service provider, and one of the trust service we provide is the remote identification. You go in front of a webcam, you show your identity card, and we give you an identity, digital identity that mimics your real-world identity. This is a risk for us because we could make a mistake, and this is why it's called a trust service. And we have a very strong responsibilities in terms of legal and civil and penal liabilities when it comes to this. Now, this revision of the IDAS regulation is introducing, as I told you before, some new trust service. One is about this wallet, which is something that we as European citizens will be free to use. We are not forced to use. No one of you will be forced to use this digital wallet in the next few years. Okay, it's up to you if you want to use that. Another service, trust service, is called, in this revision of the IDAS regulation, is called electronic ledger. Electronic ledger is a more generalized concept about blockchain and distributed ledger, because blockchain and distributed ledgers are not the same thing, are two different concepts, but in any case are specialized concepts. So the European Commission has decided to create a more general definition, which is electronic ledger. And my company and me personally, we are in charge of providing the initial work about the standardization of this electronic ledger, so what electronic ledger really is. Okay. But from the point of view of the regulation, you are not forced to consider these two new trust services connected together. So there is a wallet, there is a ledger. It's not that you have to use a ledger to provide a wallet. In general terms, it's about the single market forces, the single vendors that are going to use or not use these two technologies together. So are they going to use these two technologies together? This is the question we want to answer now. Let's say that when you consider a blockchain system, usually my approach to explain a blockchain system to newcomers is the one. A blockchain system is about to create a consensus between different parties. These parties are in a conflict of interest, a possible conflict of interest, and they are peer parties. So they have more or less the same power. Okay? This is the idea. There is no someone that is governing the process. Because if you have someone who is governing the process, there's no need to use a blockchain. The consensus is from this single party. As an example, my name and surname comes from the Italian state. It's not a relationship au pair between me and them. I could change my name and surname, but it's a very complex process in Italy, as I guess in all of European countries, more or less. Okay? So we are not on the same level. So there's no need to have a consensus of that, because they give me my name somehow. Okay? That's the point. But when it comes to this wallet, imagine that this wallet would be adopted by many different citizens in many different European countries. So I'm Italian, I'm going to use a wallet, not necessarily an Italian wallet, because I could use whatever wallet I want to use, okay? But I won't use one. Some information about this wallet could be stored in the blockchain. They could say to store, okay, Paolo now has a wallet, okay? So the start of my life inside the system. Not the specific information about me, not information about my degree. These are personal information. But the life cycle management could be inside this blockchain system. Why they have to store the information in a blockchain system? Because maybe tomorrow I'm going to use a service from Sweden, and they want to know, okay, who is this Paolo about? Is a legitimate wallet owner from Italy or not? Okay? So this kind of information could potentially store it in a blockchain, but clearly, as you understand, we are considering blockchain just a single system for all over Europe. So an interoperable, unifying system for all Europe. Is this going to happen? I don't know, because for my understanding as a company and what I see what we are doing, what our competitors are doing, each one of us is now we are in a hurry to create a company wallet, okay? So different competitors, different wallets, and they are not necessarily going to talk to each other, because the need to have this blockchain as an interoperability layer is an opportunity, a possibility, or a risk, or whatever, but not a stringent need. It's not that we are really forced to that. It's a technical possibility, and it depends a lot on how things will progress in the next 1 year and a half when it comes to the standardization committees. In the standardization committees, someone who say, okay, I want to use a blockchain because I want to store this kind of information in a blockchain because it's useful for interoperability. And we discuss about that, if that is really true or not. So this is the idea. Because the important point, again, is that the IADAS revision is about privacy, okay? So the idea to store personal information in blockchain is quite bad, clearly, for obvious reasons. And there is not a technical need, actually, to that. The life cycle management, okay, this wallet has been started, this wallet has been suspended, has been revoked. This kind of information could, and some others, but this is about technical details, I don't want to provide that now. This kind of information could be useful to have inside the blockchain system. So
Okay.
It's an open question.
Thank you very much. So we have heard how it works. Now maybe we can also look a bit more what are the risks of potentially using blockchain in it, even if we don't necessarily need to do it. So I wanted to ask Alexandra, where do you see the risk and where do you see especially also the legal challenges?
Oh man, there's a lot. No, I'm gonna be. I think I would like to mention like broad categories of what I consider risks, at least let's say from a strict legal perspective. First, I would like to stress the point I made in the introduction, which is that there is so much uncertainty around the actual responsibility of the different actors at this type of design. I'm particularly concerned about this relationship between user empowerment and user liability, in at least GDPR terms. I think also that there is so many different legal instruments which regulate different aspects of what we consider digital identity, digital identification. We can talk about our relationship to the state. We can talk about our relationship to our like social persona, about specific aspects of our online existence, and all of these different aspects do have different regulatory constraints. Think about, I don't know, the financial identification measures, even our, let's say, public service digital identity state specific. It does have different aspects that are regulated differently. And I'm thinking here, for instance, when we talk about, well, I choose to reveal which information I will share with the actor, I think that this is not really possible in a lot of times, because identification is also this power relationship, right? So usually the user is not the person in power to decide which elements of the identity will be revealed, and especially vis-a-vis the state, right? And we see that, we talk about, well, the state, but the state has all these different aspects that hold different elements of what we consider identity. And when we talk about identification, it's one thing to say, well, this is my name and my last name, or this is my date of birth and this is my nationality. But all of these elements in different contexts do have different various implications that can be more severe, right? And I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm sure some of you in the room will know about the CiTiP case in the Netherlands, where elements such as, which language do you speak, what is your nationality, did have some very severe consequences vis-a-vis citizens, right? So it is important to understand that information, or even data or identity, if you want to call it, it's not acontextual, and when we think about regulating or creating a new system that will make a safer environment for our digital online presence, we need to consider that identity is not one thing, it's not a stable thing, that it shifts, it changes, it evolves, and it is definitely always contextual in the actual interaction that we're trying to address. So it is for me, it is very difficult to imagine one horizontal technological design system which will solve all these different variables that are involved in our everyday identification processes.
Okay.
I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much. Finally, Bilgesu, do you have any ideas about, especially with regard to including biometrics, where do you see the risk and maybe also benefits and the legal restraints, the legal challenges?
Yeah, I mainly agree with Alexandra that there are many problems, but I'd like to talk about maybe two pressing ones, especially when it comes to biometric data processing. So it really depends on the decentralization technique used. As Paolo said also, for example, we have seen that we talk about the wallets, for example, that we can keep biometric data in the wallets, which is, like, according to literature, also privacy literature, this is the safest model. But in the scientific research, we have seen that blockchain is sometimes used as a biometric template protection storage or partial storage of biometric data in an encrypted form, of course. So here in this example, it is very difficult, if not possible, to delete biometric data once it's registered to blocks. So as I mentioned, biometric data is often permanent and universal. So keeping these data on blockchain might in the future pose risks to fundamental rights, and especially considering that the ledgers used in this kind of digital systems are public. For example, most infrastructures, digital identity infrastructures now using blockchain, they are public and permissioned. So this is problematic, mainly because advanced techniques such as quantum computing might threaten such networks in the future. So this is one of the problems. And another problem is the regulatory framework governing the biometric data processing. And again, in the same line with what Alexandra mentioned, is about how to allocate accountability in this framework. It's still problematic, and data subjects might not always find an accountable agent to address their concerns or exercise their rights. And we know that biometric data processing requires a more strict regime. Article 9, explicit consent to also DPIA, data protection impact assessment requirements, which increases the scope of the responsibility. So this is another problem. And we see that some regulatory action actually recently attempted at introducing new definitions of biometric data, which also adds to this complexity. For example, the AI Act proposal is one of the prominent examples. And we see many, besides that regulation proposal, we see that many explicit and implicit mention of biometric data in many regulations from EIDAS to Payment Service Directive. So to sum up, who is responsible of what is not very clear in this emerging identity management system. So we expect actually more guidance in the coming years.
Okay, thank you very much. When we see like the risk and especially the problem of how do you keep somebody accountable in this very complex environment, what do you think when you discussed it, what could be safeguards against these risks? Do you see any approaches how we could make sure that those risks will not, or solutions to make it easier? I don't know, Simran, do you have?
I think at this stage, putting any safeguard needs to be tested. Whether that approach, helps in creating this network. I think all of us are pretty much saying the same thing, that one technology is not the holy grail of creating global digital identity or digital identifiers. I think Paolo touched upon even cross-country communication and validating individuals. The main focus needs to be who are these authorities, where are these networks being created, whether it's blockchain or non-blockchain based. And then from that perspective, all the regulatory framework around it. In fact, I'm going to digress a little bit, but if you have recently heard the OpenAI conversation publicly, just about a year ago, or probably before ChatGPT came into picture, everybody was going against regulation, and now everybody's asking for regulation. So here, I think the regulatories and the the governments would have a very important role to play. The other view that I have is that I think there's a need to be a clear definition of control. What does it mean for an individual user? What is it that they want to control here? It's more around information access, and what's happening is what they want to control, not so much that whether, am I getting paid, or, where my data is being stored, as long as it's not being misused. So all these factors need to come into play to get more clarity around those definitions and who's trying to control what. And I think EDIS is a great example, regardless of course, it's blockchain based, but regardless of the underlying technology, but it's a great example of harmonizing electronic signatures across Europe, making businesses work faster. So it's a broad area, and it needs to, again, be very contextual when it comes to what safeguard mechanisms we can put forward.
Thank you. Paolo, do you also have...
Yes, if I could add a point a bit eccentric, maybe about the safeguard of this system against some possible risks. From a security point of view, from a computer security point of view, if you have a system that you are not using very frequently, on the contrary, you're using rarely, this system is probably not very secure. I just want to make you a practical example. As an example, in Italy, we have an ATM circuit that works only face-to-face, doesn't work online. And I use this system, as many Italians, dozens of millions of Italians daily, in order to, when I'm in a grocery shop, a supermarket, a taxi, whatever. So I have a credit card, literally. Unfortunately, I cannot show you, but this is a credit card. And I could tell you this is worn out because I use this very, very frequently. So just by sweeping this card very frequently, this is worn out. This has a PIN, and I remember this PIN perfectly because I use this 5 times a day. I don't have to contact my bank to ask, please give me again my PIN or reset my PIN. Another example, another credit card. This is an health card in Italy that is supposed to be used when you have to access your health information. I've never used this for that. So this is brand new. So it's perfect, very beautiful. This has a PIN. I don't know the PIN. I have to ask an online process to get back the PIN. I've never tried this process. So when I'm going to use this process, who is going to assure me that I'm taking with the right authority about that, and there is not an hacker that has intercepted the conversation? For this, the PIN is my head, which is more or less secure, okay, but is from a technical point of view is acceptable security. For this one, the PIN, who knows? Maybe I've written in some document in my house, which is a security risk, if someone is going to raid my house. But also I have to ask this to be reset, an online process that I've never tried. So which one is more secure? This one. And this one also is about money, so there are good reasons to be secure. Regarding the wallet, you are not forced to use that. So all of us are going to use this digital wallet, European digital identity wallet, only if it's useful for us, if we have some kind of convenience of utility in using this system. Otherwise, some of us are going to have this system. We are not going to use this, and this makes it simpler for an attacker to attack the system, because it's simpler for an attacker to impersonate someone, say, okay, you have to reset your PIN, give me your credential, whatever. If I'm using my system daily, I know that this is not the right flow of work, okay? So security is very related to usability and to the utility of the system. And this is quite a challenge for this European digital anti-wallet, because from one point, we do not have to use it, but some of us are going to use this system, and the hope is that we are going to use this system on a daily basis, which this not necessarily make the system more secure, because the system could be unsecure because it's a bad piece of software, but at least makes a lot of attention under the system. So the system is very under the light. Many people are using this. There are a lot of investments from the companies that developing, because the system will be free for every one of us. Okay, I don't know who is going to pay for the system, but not the single citizen. That's the point. So just to give you another idea of the kind of problems that we have with this wallet. So this is the message, and this turns from the point of view of industry create a system that is usable, that is simple to use, not simplicistic, but simple to use, and it has some intrinsic utility. Otherwise, it would be just an experiment, and no one is going to use the system, and the very few people that are using them will be targeted. That's for sure.
Thank you. In view of the time, I would like to open and ask if somebody has questions. I already see the first one.
Just a quick question. You said that if you store data Yeah, you were saying that if you store data on a sort of electronic ledger blockchain system device, that is impossible. I think that's what it was, to delete the data. Why is it impossible to delete it?
Because one of the properties, the fundamental properties of blockchain is that once data are stored in the system, you need the agreement of all the different parties managing the system if you want to change the content. And the idea is that this unanimous consensus should never be reached. To make you an example, Bitcoin is the first example of a blockchain system, and there you store your transaction. So how much Bitcoin do you have? The idea, in an abstract way, if you consider all the different thousands of organizations in the world that are managing Bitcoin, that have a copy of the ledger, they could make an agreement. They say, okay, Paolo no longer has Bitcoins, okay, because we don't like Paolo. It's very difficult to reach in practice. So it's not a technical problem, organizational problem. There are ways to manage this, because considering that this could be a problem, because under GDPR I want my data to be changed, deleted, retracted, whatever. What if you are in the real need to store some kind of personal data in a blockchain? It's better not to have this need. But if you are in this unlucky position, in the blockchain you do not store the data, you store a pointer to the data. So you say the information about Paolo are on this place, and this place, which is outside the blockchain, is a traditional cloud system, and at some point you could decide to change data in the cloud system. So the blockchain will point to data that are no longer valid, that have been deleted, that have been changed, whatever. There are many possibilities to do that. The general approach is try to avoid store data, personal data in blockchain. Clearly, you store information about an industrial system, and no one cares about the privacy related to that. But health data on a blockchain. There are advanced cryptographic techniques that could allow you to change the data in the blockchain, okay, but are not very frequently used because they are cumbersome, they require some kind of centralized control, and if you have a blockchain, you want to change data, do not use the blockchain, use the database and everyone is happy. That's
Thank you. Are there other questions? I already see some more.
Thank you for the presentation. First comment, nothing is free with data. It's my opinion. And what's about sustainability of the system? Thank you very much.
Take it. I think we'll all have a little bit of a view on this and which angle of sustainability we want to take. I mean, if we are just talking about ledger being run sustainability, and we're talking about green technology, if that's the angle we take on sustainability, then of course it is a problem, and it is being looked into. It is also about the architecture, again, very limiting the conversation purely to blockchain. It is also being looked into the architecture, how to minimize the movement of blocks and not creating a lot of digital footprint. So when you say sustainability, again, we'll have to contextualize it also on the underlying infrastructure and what is it being used for, and the volume, etc.
I saw also a third question. Maybe we just go quickly, since we don't have much time anymore, to quickly see the third question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. While I was listening, I was wondering what kind of problem is solved by the use of blockchain and of the digitalized wallet. And I was thinking, okay, with a digitalized wallet, things become easier. It's easier to identify yourself when using different types of services. But then it implies that if identification is easier, then more services will ask for identification. And so my question is there a voice in this debate which is just saying we shouldn't make it easier to identify yourself because it calls, therefore, for more identification processes?
Okay, who would like to answer that question? Do you want to
I think it's me. So, I believe that actually, for example, Alexandra already mentioned that actually when we talk about control over personal data, for example, how can we actually talk about this when we talk about a legal obligation to identify ourselves when the other party is the state? And now with blockchain-based identity systems, it's becoming more and more that we have to identify ourselves also in a private party that is vested the control by the government. So I do not think that it is a good way to do it, but also I would like to say that blockchain and self-sovereign identity is not exclusive to blockchain. For example, there are other examples that are not using blockchain, but there are, of course, good and bad points, and there are comparisons about it, and the research is still going on. Yeah, from my perspective, first, I'm a legal scholar, but there are other technical ways to do it without blockchain as well. For example, zero-knowledge proof has been there for years as a very privacy-enhancing technique. And with that technique, actually, you can disclose the data in a selective way. So, in my view, it is preferred for competition reasons and to distribute the power over data because right now, as you know, this data is being pulled in the centralized databases in very big companies. So this is already, of course, posing a danger to fundamental rights. But the second reason why actually blockchain used is, of course, the security reasons. But as Paolo said, there, of course, is not also black and white. So if you don't really build your system with many nodes all over the world and like use a lot this system and take necessary measures, of course, it is not going to be secure, especially in the future. So we can also pose the question that is it really future-proof? And yeah, I will stop here because I'm not a technical person, but yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. So.
Am I abusing the time, or can I?
Very quickly.
Okay, well.
I think we're almost at the end.
No, I wanted to take, thank you for this question. I wanted to take this answer a little bit outside of the legalese, you know, what is anonymous data and what is personal data, etc. Curiously enough, with specifically self-sovereign identity, the ideological progenitor was actually coming from the highly aware communities from the like encryption world, who they were talking about self-sovereign authority, right? So it was about, well, you know, I need to be able to identify myself and I need to be able to hide myself whenever I want to. So it did come from circles that were aware about the need to have this space of anonymization, specifically from the state, right? This was all about, well, you know, I need to be able to have a space where the state my identity does not hinge on the state recognizing me. The way that it has been developed now is completely different, because now we see this kind of like co-optation of this ideology from the state to say, well, this is the safest way for you to be identified online. This is a claim I cannot actually have an informed opinion on because I'm not a technical person. Now, my fear is that when we're talking about this identification measures, like the revision of these identification measures from a legal and technical perspective, we're talking about specifically, again, the state, but this will leak into also, well, you know, if I can use this wallet or this identifier to, you know, access my health data or my bank data, why wouldn't I use it to, you know, create, you know, my like online presence every time I use any online service, right? So think content moderation, where it's extremely valuable for platforms to have a specific way to identify users, right? And this shifts this perspective of the way that we use internet to say, well, there is no need to have anonymity. There is no need to have the space for anonymization, because why would I just access all services with this one identifier or this 5 identifiers? And in my opinion, this actually, yeah, creates this sense of the less space for anonymity or pseudonymity or.
Thank you. I see there are also more questions.
Yes, I try to be very short to the short answer to elaborate a bit more. These attributes about you, so your degree, your income, your residence, are all about you. But only you would be the person that would consolidate them together in a unified view to say, this is my degree and this is my income and this is my residence. Because the way this information will be provided to you are provided in a way that you could manage them, but no one could link this information to you, even if they are disclosed by accident. Essentially, we are going to use different keys to sign this information. This is the idea. Your system will manage automatically for you a lot different of signing keys. This is the idea. And each one of them will be used for every different set of attributes. So only we as users will be able to help the service provider to understand that all this information from different sources are all about the same person. That's why this information will be totally unrelated one to the other. We have to do this in a technical way, but it's totally doable. That's the point. Okay, here's the point.
So to conclude, I want to actually share two personal life examples on the two questions that were raised around data deletion and also should we not identify ourselves, right? And why it's not black and white. If many of you, assuming, have traveled and probably lived in different countries, and I used to live in the US probably 20 plus years ago. But even if I go today, the authorities have all my data. They know the bank account I had, where I lived back in 2001, which apartment I moved also after 8 months, right? So there is a little bit of a reservation we have, not just a technology infrastructure, ledger or non-ledger, but we are not very comfortable, authorities are not very comfortable in deleting data. We can make it inaccessible, but then the government still have access to that. And that is why there are regulation frameworks needed. The other point I want to very quickly conclude around is a very interesting question you raised, and it really got me thinking that should we not even identify ourselves? And I think the issue is not that we shouldn't identify ourselves. The issue is about what information gets shared when we have to identify ourselves. And I'll give you a real life example. About 10 years ago, I was in my early 30s, and I had, I was already a mother of two, and I looked a lot younger than my age, and I was at the alcohol shop to just buy a bottle of wine, and the gentleman asked my ID to verify if I was of the legal age, right? On one side, I was very offended that I'm a mother of two, and how come you need to verify my age, right? But then I thought, okay, fair enough. Maybe I'm looking too childish or too young. But what got me thinking, even then, 10 years ago, that he only needed to know, am I above 18 or not? That's it. And that's what identification needs to do. But when I showed my Swedish ID, he could see where I'm living, and there was additional information, exactly when I'm born, and there was, a small talk happening. And this is a very simple example, but then if you, look at in a macro way and extrapolate it online, when frauds happen, because people get to know more than they should about you. So to just address that question, that we still have to identify in different manners, birth certificate, passports, we've got borders globally. But it's what they get to know, what they should know only to validate, can I enter this country or not? Can I buy alcohol or not? Yeah?
Thank you very much. I think there's still much to discuss, and maybe we can continue over coffee. But I would like to thank our panelists very much for being here for that time and for their wonderful insights, and also the audience for being here and for their question. Finally, I would like to thank the organizers of CPDP, Center for ITMP. And I would like to thank also Bilgesu for organizing this panel. Thank you.